All right, so we'll start with food safety hazards. So there are three basic types of hazards that can be present in food. The first is physical hazards. So this would be things like wood or bones, maybe some metal shavings that ended up in a food product that would cause damage to a consumer's mouth, teeth, digestive tract if they were to eat that product. Next on the list of hazards are chemical hazards. And this group includes allergens. So the big 8 allergens required for labeling here in the US are dairy, eggs, peanuts, tree nuts, fish, crustaceans, wheat, and soy. So if you do, if there are plans to have any of these products along with other things that aren't allergens, you need to have, some mechanism for segregating allergens from non-allergen products. Some other chemical hazards to consider, mycotoxin, so those are toxins produced by certain types of molds, fall into this chemical hazard category. So aflatoxin is a mycotoxin we worry about primarily in tree nuts and peanuts, but it can also be an issue in animal feed, so something to consider there. In produce, on the produce side, patulin is a mycotoxin that can be produced by some molds growing in fruits. So if you have fruit production on your radar, just consider that potential hazard. Other chemical hazards, of course, would be things like pesticides, chemical fertilizers, and then any agents that you're using for cleaning and sanitizing. And the last group of hazards associated with foodborne illness are biological. So these include bacteria, viruses, and parasites that can cause foodborne illnesses. And that's really where I'm going to focus in today. And when it comes to produce safety, I would say that is the emphasis as well. So controlling those biological hazards. So in the field of microbiology, this is a field that really encompasses a broad, diverse group of organisms. So parasites, fungi, and yeast, these are all eukaryotic organisms that have a nucleus in their cells, and they could be unicellular or multicellular depending on the particular organism we're talking about, but they definitely have relevance to foods and food safety. Bacteria are a category we're going to talk a lot about today. So these are single-celled organisms, and they don't have a nucleus within their cells, so differentiating them from some of those fungi and yeasts. Viruses, which I think we're all acutely aware of right now, these actually aren't considered living organisms. We call them obligate intracellular parasites. They don't actually increase in numbers outside of a particular type of cell in a particular type of organism. But collectively, all of these microorganisms, they kind of get lumped in to the same category a lot, and there are some general terms used to describe them, like germs, microbes, bugs in some situations. But they're really important for lots of different fields, medicine, of course, but definitely also the agriculture and food industries. So this slide here just lists the types of microorganisms that are important to food, and they're categorized as being contributors to food spoilage, to causing foodborne illness, or many of them are used in a positive fashion for food enhancement. Really, the most important group of microorganisms to consider are bacteria. So there are a number of bacteria that cause foodborne illnesses. Bacteria are also a major cause of food spoilage. And there are also varieties of bacteria that are used beneficially for fermentation. Molds and yeasts, they're typically associated with spoilage of products, but of course we know they're also used beneficially in fermentations. I thank you, yeast, for enhancing my life. Viruses and parasites, these two types of microorganisms, they're only associated with foodborne illness. Neither one of those two types of organisms have the ability to actually increase the numbers in foods, so they don't cause spoilage and they're not used for fermentation, but should they end up in a food product due to cross-contamination, they can cause foodborne illnesses. So most of the organisms that cause foodborne illnesses are what we call enteric organisms. There are a few exceptions, but most are these enteric organisms that are typically found in the gastrointestinal tract of humans and animals. As such, many of these microorganisms are typically associated with products of animal origin. So with beef products, we think about Escherichia coli. With poultry, of course, we're concerned about Salmonella and Campylobacter. But we know now that many other types of foods can easily be cross-contaminated with these enteric pathogens, either through direct contact with manure or indirect contact where a water source, tools or equipment would be contaminated with these pathogens. And this contamination can really occur anywhere in that field to fork chain. So I've listed here on this slide some of the enteric pathogens we're most concerned about when it comes to food safety. I would say in terms of sources of these pathogens on the farm environment, certainly animals are a big concern. So as I already mentioned, many of these pathogens are carried by animals that we raise as livestock, and in those animals, there are typically no symptoms, and so we don't know that whether or not these animals are carrying pathogens that might make us as humans sick. We are also a really important source of pathogens. We can shed high levels of these pathogens in vomit or feces if we're sick, and if we're not following proper hand hygiene, we can easily contaminate foods. But we're also very concerned about soil, water, and equipment that can be contaminated with these pathogens as well. So again, as I already mentioned, manure, but also kind of indirectly, if water sources become contaminated with manure, those can also be issues. And so we need to take steps to identify what those sources of risk are on the farm, and then take steps to manage those food safety risks.